The ceremony had not yet begun. We were standing in the university atrium, the long marble corridor off the main lecture hall, holding small glasses of warm white wine and making the kind of conversation that happens before things that matter. There were tall printed stands with the university crest, rows of black and gold bunting draped between the pillars, and soft instrumental music playing from somewhere behind the service desk that nobody was listening to. My mother found me near the far wall. 3 of my brother James's colleagues were standing close enough to hear. She leaned toward me as though she was about to say something private. And she said, "I always tell people, we have 2 children. James has given everything to this institution. And Lily?" She paused. She smiled a small, careful smile. "Well?" "She was always our greatest disappointment." Then she turned back to James's colleagues and asked if they'd tried the canapes. But before I tell you what happened when that ceremony began, if you enjoy long English stories like this one, subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every comment, and I genuinely love knowing who's on the other end of this. My name is Lily. I am 34 years old. I grew up in a red brick terrace in Coventry. The kind of street where all the houses are identical, and you find yours by the color of the front door. Ours was dark green. My father painted it himself every 5 or 6 years, and he always took great care with the edges. My father is Robert Caldwell. He was a structural engineer for a civil firm for 33 years. He is the kind of man who does crosswords in pen, not pencil, not because he's arrogant, but because he genuinely thinks pencil is for drafts, and life is not a draft. He makes his own bread every Sunday morning from muscle memory, no recipe, flour on his forearms before 8 o'clock. My mother is Catherine Caldwell. She was a GP for 30 years. She is very good at what she does. She is the kind of doctor who remembers her patients' children's names and asks about them at the end of appointments. She is genuinely gifted at medicine. She is also someone who decided, somewhere in my adolescence, that there is a correct shape for a life, and that anything outside that shape requires explaining to other people. I was the thing she found herself explaining. My brother James is 4 years older than me. He is a professor of applied engineering at Marwell University. He has never been unkind to me on purpose. I want to say that at the start, because it matters, and because it is true. And then there is me. I was 17 years old when I told my mother I wanted to study business and computer science at university. She was at the kitchen table. It was a Saturday morning in October, and the kitchen smelled of the bread my father had made. He was out on a walk. My mother had a cup of tea in front of her, one hand around the mug. To her right was a copy of the Marwell University undergraduate prospectus, the thick one, full color, printed on the kind of paper that has weight to it. She had been marking it up in red biro. Not for me. For James, who had received his conditional offer that week. She had circled modules, underlined entry requirements, made notes in the margins about application deadlines and accommodation options. There were 3 red asterisks on the engineering faculty page. She looked up when I said it. She did not say anything for a moment. She turned the prospectus over, as though setting it aside for later, and looked at me. "Engineering would be more respectable," she said. "James is doing engineering." I told her that James's choices were James's choices, and I had different ones. She said, and this is a direct quote, because I wrote it in my journal that evening, word for word, "Lily, no one is going to take you seriously in business unless you have a real qualification behind you. Computer science is a fine subject, but business is something anyone thinks they can do. I don't want you to embarrass yourself. I looked at the red biro marks in the margins of James's prospectus. I thought about saying that business is a real qualification. I thought about saying that computer science is also a real qualification. I thought about asking what she meant exactly by embarrass. I didn't say any of it. I went upstairs. I sat on my bed. I opened the laptop I had bought with birthday money and found the UCAS website and applied to 3 universities that were not Marwell. At the end of my second year at university, I left. It was not a decision made in crisis. I had been building a small compliance and maintenance tracking tool with 2 friends, Priya and Dan, since the first term of my first year. We had started it because Priya's mother was a private landlord in Nottingham, and the paperwork she had to manage was genuinely terrible. It was a simple problem. We solved it. Then we showed it to 2 other landlords who both paid us a monthly fee to keep using it. By the summer of my second year, we had 11 paying users and a waiting list. What university was teaching me had started to feel slower than what the product was teaching me. I talked to Priya and Dan about it. We agreed. I called home on a Sunday evening to tell my parents. My father said, "Are you sure?" "That seems very fast," he said it. The way he says things when he is worried but doesn't want to discourage you. Gently. With a small upward lift at the end, as though it might still be fine. My mother said, "You have given up." I said I hadn't given up on anything. I was going toward something. There was a difference. She said, "I don't know how to explain that to people." And then, "James is sitting his third-year exams next week. His professor rang your father to say James might be the strongest student in the cohort in 10 years. I said that was wonderful, and it was. I meant it. We hung up. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at my desk. I had a refurbished ThinkPad I'd bought on eBay for £400, secondhand because I'd spent most of my student loan on the product rather than myself. And I opened it and went back to work. That was the choice. I had made it. I was not going to unmake it. James passed his PhD viva on a Tuesday afternoon in November. The external examiner shook his hand and said he had produced one of the most elegant theses the department had seen in a decade. James called my parents from the corridor outside the examination room, still in his suit. James called my parents from the corridor outside the examination room, still in his suit. My parents drove to Birmingham that evening and booked a table at Giuliani's. They called James's friends. They called my Aunt Patricia and Uncle Neil. They called me from the table. "We're at Giuliani's. James got his doctorate. Can you get here?" I had been in a 2-hour call with a property management company in Leeds. 47 buildings, 400 units. It was the kind of contract that would either save the company or not. The call had ended at 7:30. I drove to Birmingham. I arrived at 8:15. My mother was standing at the entrance to the restaurant. She saw me come through the door and said, "Oh, Lily's here. Better late than never." She said it warmly. She said it to James's friends, who were clustered at the end of the table, and they laughed politely. She said it to James's friends, who were clustered at the end of the table, and they laughed politely. The way you do when someone's family arrives and you're not sure of the dynamics. The waiter brought one without making a fuss about it. James raised his glass across the table. "Glad you came," he said. And he genuinely was. That was always his way. The company in Leeds signed the following Thursday. £84,000 per year, our first enterprise contract. Nobody asked how my week had gone. James married Harriet in June, on a Saturday that turned out to be perfect weather. James married Harriet in June, on a Saturday that turned out to be perfect weather. The kind of June day that seems to be apologizing for every bad day that came before it. Harriet wore a dress with long sleeves and small buttons down the back, and she looked genuinely beautiful. James cried at the altar, which surprised nobody who knew him. I was not a bridesmaid. That was fine. Harriet had her own sister and her own friends, and there was no reason I should have been. You're good at that sort of organizing, aren't you? The logistics side. It's not a bridesmaid thing. It's just coordination. I said yes, because it was James's wedding, and I wanted to be useful. I wore an earpiece all morning. Because it was James's wedding, and I wanted to be useful. I wore an earpiece all morning. I stood at the entrance to the venue and directed the florist delivery van to the correct gate. I checked the cold station temperatures against the hire company's contract. I managed a substitution when the salmon canapes ran short and the caterer needed approval for a replacement. I was standing at the service entrance at the back of the venue, near the kitchen doors, talking to the florist's delivery driver about the table centerpieces. I watched through a gap in the folding doors. He looked very happy. I was glad for him. I genuinely was. That has never changed. But I was standing by the kitchen in an earpiece while everyone else sat down. By the time I was 28, we had 22 full-time employees, a customer support team, and a building management contract with a housing association covering 1,100 properties across 4 cities. James mentioned at Sunday lunch that he was thinking of launching a data analysis consultancy on the side. I had the money. I had been paying myself carefully and had built savings for the first time in my working life. I said I could invest. There was a pause. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at his plate. My mother said, "We'll help James through the bank. That way things stay clean between you all. Family money in a business can complicate things, can't it? It's better to keep it professional." She said it pleasantly, as though she was doing me a favor by declining on James's behalf. I had already written the check. As though she was doing me a favor by declining on James's behalf. I had already written the check. If I'd had the money at the table, immediately, in physical form, it would have been harder to decline. It was not harder to decline. I put the check back in my pocket. James's bank loan fell through 6 weeks later. He found a different investor. He never mentioned the Sunday lunch conversation. Neither did I. The check is still in a drawer somewhere. Neither did I. The check is still in a drawer somewhere. My mother had spent 3 weeks on the arrangements. The seating plan alone went through 7 drafts. My mother had spent 3 weeks on the arrangements. The seating plan alone went through 7 drafts. I mean that without irony. After the main course, my mother stood and gave a toast. She thanked my father first, which was right and good. She thanked James and his wife Harriet, who were expecting their first child. She thanked James and his wife Harriet, who were expecting their first child. And she said she could not imagine a greater joy than watching her son become a father. Warm laughter, even. It was said with the tone of an affectionate family joke, the kind of line that lands softly and disappears immediately. On the table, in the centerpiece arrangement, was a hand-blown glass vase in pale amber, a Portuguese style from the early 1990s. My parents had broken one identical to it on their honeymoon in Funchal. My mother had mentioned it once when I was 12, in passing, and I had never forgotten it. I had spent 4 months tracking down the manufacturer, sourcing one from a restoration shop in Leamington Spa, and having it cleaned and repolished. Nobody mentioned the vase. Not at dinner. Not afterward. I do not think my mother ever knew what it was. In February of my 32nd year, my company was acquired. The acquirer was a large property software group based in Edinburgh. They had been watching us for 18 months. The acquirer was a large property software group based in Edinburgh. They had been watching us for 18 months. The deal was negotiated over 6 weeks, reviewed by lawyers on both sides, and completed on a Monday morning in the offices of a solicitor firm in central Birmingham. After tax and the founder's share split, I retained £3.1 million. It was, by any meaningful measure, more money than I had. It was money I had earned, one client contract and one product improvement at a time, starting from a 400-pound laptop on a university desk. I told my parents over Sunday lunch, 2 weeks after the completion date. I had waited until I had the right words. Not to manage the announcement, but because I had learned over many years that the wrong words in the wrong order gave my mother material to work with. I told my parents over Sunday lunch, 2 weeks after the completion date. I had waited until I had the right words. He looked at me the way he looks at things he finds genuinely surprising and genuinely good. "That's wonderful," he said, quietly, not theatrically. I said, "We sold the company. Here is what that means. This is the number." My father set down his fork. My mother said, "Oh, how nice." Then she said, "Will you get a proper job now?" She said it without looking up from her plate. The way he says things that actually matter to him. 14 years of building something real, while the people closest to you kept asking when you were going to do something serious. What would you have done with that money? Tell me in the comments, in English. I'm genuinely curious. My former office was on the 2nd floor of a converted warehouse in Birmingham's Digpith quarter. The building had been a metalwork factory in a previous life. You could still see the original loading bay doors on the ground floor, painted over but not removed. We had rented the space for 3 years and painted the walls an off-white that Priya called not quite cream. There was a desk I had bought secondhand from a pub that was closing. Solid oak, 3 drawers, deeply scratched in one corner where someone had dragged something heavy across it, which I liked because it suggested a history. The day after the acquisition completed, I went back. The equipment had been moved or sold. Priya and Dan had their own plans. The space was booked for a new tenant in 2 weeks, and I had no particular reason to be there. But I had a set of keys and a cup of coffee and a draft email I wanted to read. The space was booked for a new tenant in 2 weeks, and I had no particular reason to be there. But I had a set of keys and a cup of coffee and a draft email I wanted to read. I had written it at 2:17 in the morning, 18 months earlier. I had written it after a board meeting where we had been discussing growth projections for the following year, a conversation that had gone well and had left me for the first time in years with a specific sense of where the company was going and how it would get there. I had sat in my car in the car park afterward, and I had thought, if this works, what do I want to do with a piece of it that is not about the company? I explained that I was the founder of a property technology company and that I expected to sell it within 2 years. I said I was interested in discussing the possibility of endowing a scholarship in the engineering sciences faculty specifically for women in applied technical fields, with a particular focus on first-generation university students. I explained that I was the founder of a property technology company and that I expected to sell it within 2 years. I want to explain why. Because I have been asked, since the ceremony, since the news found its way back to various corners of our family, whether I was making a point. Whether naming it after them was its own form of cruelty, a demonstration, a public humiliation in reverse. It was not. I named it after them because I still believed in the people they were capable of being. Whether naming it after them was its own form of cruelty, a demonstration, a public humiliation in reverse. It was not. I named it after them because I still believed in the people they were capable of being. My father, patient and careful with his hands, doing things properly just because that was the right way to do them. My mother, who spent 30 years telling frightened patients the truth in the gentlest possible form. People who had given me real things, even in the years when they were also giving me the other things. The donation was to remain anonymous until the naming ceremony, which was scheduled for the autumn. I want to be honest about something. I did not tell my family. And the reason was not that I was planning a dramatic reveal. I was not sitting at home rehearsing a speech, imagining my mother's face. The reason was much simpler. Telling them would have required sitting with their responses, the qualifications, the pivots. I did not tell my family, and the reason was not that I was planning a dramatic reveal. I would have had to listen to her say something like, "Have you thought about the tax structure? You should speak to an accountant before you finalize anything." Or, "That's very generous, darling. Is it tax deductible?" Or simply, "James will be very pleased." Making it somehow about James. I would have had to listen to her say something like, "Have you thought about the tax structure?" I had earned it, not in the sense of deserving credit, but in the specific sense that it had cost me something. I did not want that. The thing I had decided was mine. I had earned it, not in the sense of deserving credit, but in the specific sense that it had cost me something. And the something it had cost was my own. And so the decision was my own. Sharma had described it as a formal event. I had not asked how formal. I assumed formal meant 30 people in a meeting room with nice biscuits. A plaque in a corridor somewhere. A brief paragraph in the faculty newsletter. Doctor. The engineering faculty was marking the centenary of its founding, and they were honoring long-serving academics, celebrating recent achievements, and recognizing the faculty's history. I was wrong about that. The invitation to James's honor ceremony arrived in September. It was a formal event. He had earned it in exactly the way he earns everything, by simply showing up and being thorough and giving more care than the situation required. The letter from the university also included, in a separate paragraph near the bottom of the second page, a note that there would be a special announcement regarding a new endowment. The letter from the university also included, in a separate paragraph near the bottom of the second page, a note that there would be a special announcement regarding a new endowment. It did not specify what the endowment was. I read that paragraph 3 times. I almost didn't go. Because I had calculated, very carefully, how much sitting in a room with my mother for 2 hours was likely to cost me. Sharma had described the announcement as part of an upcoming ceremony, whether she had meant this one, but it would mean something to me. He said it quietly and simply, not as leverage. Then James called. He said, "Mom said she hopes you'll come. I know you two don't always see eye to eye, But it would mean something to me. He said it quietly and simply, not as leverage. I genuinely thought, that if the endowment was mentioned at all, it would be a footnote in the program. One line. Something I could sit with quietly at the back. That is not what happened. The atrium reception lasted 45 minutes. I found a glass of wine and a position near the far wall and watched people talk. James was across the room with his department colleagues, people he clearly genuinely liked, people who made him laugh, with actual laughter, not the polite kind. I found a glass of wine and a position near the far wall and watched people talk. She arrived with a fresh glass and looked me over briefly. "You look tired," she said. I told her I'd had a long drive. She nodded. She looked past me at James's group, then back at me, and then she said it quietly. But I was not the only one who heard. I always tell people we have 2 children. She looked past me at James's group, then back at me, and then she said it quietly. But I was not the only one who heard. I always tell people, we have 2 children. James has given everything to this institution. And Lily, she paused, the small smile. Well, the bathroom was off the main corridor. Small, cool, white tiles. I turned the cold tap on and put my wrists under it for a long moment. Then she turned back to James's colleagues and asked if they'd tried the canapes. I excused myself. I had learned, somewhere in the space between 20 and 34, that certain things my mother said were not actually about me. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was not going to cry. But in a university bathroom 12 minutes before a ceremony, grief was not useful. I dried my hands. I straightened my jacket. They were about a shape she had decided I did not fit. The grief about that is legitimate. It is real, and it matters. Sharma had mentioned 3 weeks earlier that the first scholarship recipient had been selected, a young woman from Sheffield, 19 years old, first in her family at university, studying applied engineering. I thought about a name I did not yet know. Doctor. If you're using this story to practice your English, I have some useful resources in the description below. Different ways to keep learning after you finish listening. Have a look if that sounds helpful. The lecture hall seated 220 when full, which it nearly was. The chairs were arranged in rows with small printed programs on each one. Have a look if that sounds helpful. The lecture hall seated 220 when full, which it nearly was. The chairs were arranged in rows with small printed programs on each one. James sat in the front row with Harriet and their daughter Esme, who was 4 and had been given a coloring book on the condition that she use it quietly. I sat 3 rows behind, beside my father. James sat in the front row with Harriet and their daughter Esme. Patel, who seemed to like my mother, which I have noticed is easier for people who have not known her for 34 years. Dr. Ananya Sharma opened the session. She was exactly as I remembered her from our 2 meetings, precise and warm in the same breath, which is the hardest combination to achieve in public speaking. She was exactly as I remembered her from our 2 meetings, precise and warm in the same breath, which is the hardest combination to achieve in public speaking. She mentioned names, former students who had done notable things. She was measured and genuine and never once seemed to be performing gratitude. She seemed to actually feel it. Then she came to James. She mentioned names, former students who had done notable things. The way he had taken on the second-year thermodynamics cohort when the previous lecturer retired, despite having no obligation to, and had turned it into one of the highest-rated modules in the faculty. She said, "A university is a place, but it is also a culture, and cultures are made by specific people making specific daily choices," and had turned it into one of the highest-rated modules in the faculty. Esme held up her coloring book, which had a horse on it. The room laughed. My father put his hands together very steadily. My mother applauded precisely, the way she does when something is affecting her and she does not want it to show. Dr. Sharma looked at her notes. She said, "Before we close this evening, I want to share something that has meant a great deal to this faculty." The room settled. The rustling stopped. This year, Marwell University received its largest single private endowment from an individual donor. This endowment establishes a new annual scholarship for women in the applied engineering sciences, with a particular focus on supporting first-generation university students. I looked at my hands in my lap. The scholarship was established through a private foundation. This endowment establishes a new annual scholarship for women in the applied engineering sciences. There was a murmur in the room. People looking at their programs, looking at one another, trying to understand the connection. The name went on no one's name tag. There was no Caldwell in the faculty directory. "It is my honor," Dr. Sharma said, "to introduce our donor this evening." The scholarship was established by Miss Lily Caldwell through the Callahan Foundation in honor of her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Catherine Caldwell of Coventry. The room went very still. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of 200 people understanding something at the same time. I did not stand up. I did not speak. I did not look at my mother. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and kept my eyes on the lectern. I did not stand up. I did not speak. I did not look at my mother. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and kept my eyes on the lectern. He was the first person in the room to do it, and he did it without looking at his mother first, without looking at my father, without checking anyone's face for permission. He looked at me. He looked at the stage. James stood up. He pushed his chair back, and he stood, and he started to clap. Dr. Sharma started clapping from the lectern. And then the whole room. 200 people in a university lecture hall in September, applauding a decision made at a desk in Birmingham at 2 a.m. Dr. Sharma started clapping from the lectern, and then the whole room. She sat with both hands on her program, and her eyes on the front of the room, and she did not move for a long moment. My father did not let go of my hand. James called at 9:30 that evening. He was in the car park outside the venue. She sat with both hands on her program and her eyes on the front of the room, and she did not move for a long moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. I said, "It wasn't about you. It wasn't about Mom. It was just the scholarship. I didn't want it to become a family conversation." He was quiet for a moment. "The first recipient," he said. "Do you know who she is?" I told him. "Maya Okafor, 19, Sheffield, applied engineering. She'll be in my faculty," he said. "I know." Another silence. Then, "I want you to know I'm sorry for all the times I could have said something and didn't. The wedding day, the dinner when you were 24, the loan thing. You knew about the loan thing, didn't you?" "Yes." I said. I'm sorry, he said again. For all the times I could have said something and didn't. The wedding day, the dinner when you were 24, the loan thing. You knew about the loan thing, didn't you? Yes, I said. I'm sorry, he said again. I told him the apology was welcome and that I hadn't made the donation to collect one. He said he understood that. He said he was going to try to be a better brother. He arrived at 11 o'clock in the morning. I had made coffee. He came in and sat at my kitchen table, and he looked at me in the way he has. A long, careful look. Not uncomfortable, just attentive. And then he said, I'm so sorry we missed it, love. Your whole life. Not the company, not the scholarship. Your whole life. I did not tell him it was fine, because it was not entirely fine, and he deserved an honest answer, and so did I. I said, I know, Dad. He nodded. He held his coffee cup in both hands. After a while, he said, Your mom is trying. She is. She just doesn't always know how to say the right things in the right way. I said I knew that too. And I do. We talked. He told me about a crossword clue he had been stuck on for 3 days. A 7-letter word for a type of mechanical and I got it in under a minute, which made him laugh. He walked to his car at 1 o'clock and opened the boot. He had made bread that morning, half a loaf, wrapped in a cloth. He pressed it into my hands without making a speech about it. We have lunch every other Thursday now. He drives down. We talk mostly about crosswords and occasionally about engineering, which it turns out we both find interesting. It arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was plain cream card, no printed design, the kind you find in a box of 12 assortments. Her handwriting is very neat and very small because she is a doctor. And she learned to write small in the margins of paper. The inside read, We are so proud of you. And below that, in slightly smaller letters, I am sorry. That was all. I sat with it for a long time. I turned it over. I read it twice. Then I put it on the shelf above my desk, between a photograph of Priya and Dan at the company's first birthday, and a small, smooth stone that Esme gave me from James's garden, because she had decided, at age 4.5, that the card is still there. I am not ready to say it made everything all right. 14 years of being the wrong shape in someone's story does not resolve in 5 words on a cream card. But I am also not ready to say it meant nothing. It meant she knew. The first Robert and Catherine Caldwell scholar is M. She is 19 years old, from Sheffield. She is the first in her family to attend university. She is studying applied engineering with a focus on thermodynamic systems, which her application described as her first. She was selected by a committee that I was not part of, and whose deliberations I did not attend. She does not know who. What she knows is that the money is there, that she belongs in that room, and that someone she has never met, decided that the field she loves is worth naming something important after. That was always the whole point. If you have ever been the quiet one, the one who was told you were the disappointment, who built something real while the people around you looked somewhere else, who swallowed things in silence because the work you did while nobody was watching was still work. The choice you made on your own without anyone's approval, and what you built or started or simply stayed with year after year, it belongs to you. It is yours. It does not become less yours because the people who should have been paying attention were not. What you build is yours, whether or not they ever put their hands together. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the moment comes when a room full of strangers does it for them. If this story stayed with you, subscribe so you never miss a new long English story. I post regularly, and stories like this are what this channel is made of. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.